All right, in this video, we're gonna be on the MPC Live 2, and we're gonna be making this beat. That's right, we're making an 80s style weekend vibe beat on the MPC Live 2. Now, if you want to grab all these drum sounds in this drum program and follow along to the drum sequencing, click the link below to head over to my Patreon page where all my Patreons can grab the drum program and follow along. And also in future tutorials, all the drum programs and the presets are going to be available exclusively to my Patreons, so click the link below. And of course, if you're new here, please like and subscribe to keep this channel growing and keep it going. So let's jump right in. All right, so first let's just go back and have a listen to this drum groove. So in something like this, I typically want to start with the drums because I want to have a groove and a backbone for me to build my bass line and my chords off of. So if we come in here and hit mute, we're just going to mute everything else besides the drums. And now let's jump into the drum program and take a look specifically at what's laid out on each one and how it's laid out. Now, a little tip, always label everything. Just by hitting this, you can label it that this track is the drum track and that this program is your drum program. I also like to put 1 to correspond with what track it's on. So as you see, when we go to the second track, I can see that the second program right here is allocated towards that. The third track, it's labeled as the third one, fourth, and so forth. That way, when it comes time to look at everything that's loaded into here, if it doesn't have a number next to it, I can actually go and see that, if this was filled up, these were unused, so I can go ahead and delete those just to minimize the size of my project. So just a quick tip, always label your program the same as your track with the number so you can correspond to see 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, and if it doesn't have a number next to it, you can just go ahead and delete that out. So taking a look at the drums right here, it's a pretty simple standard setup drum kit with kick and then some claps and snares, a couple of hi-hats, a couple of open hi-hats, a shaker loop, tambourines, and then some perks. But there's a couple little tricks within this drum kit that we're going to look at. Let's start off with the shaker loop right here. So I want to come in and I just want to isolate the shaker loop, so I'm going to mute everything but the shaker loop to take a listen to the shaker loop. So here's our shaker loop. Now you'll notice here on the screen that it shows you shaker loop and it says 4 times it has the shaker loop within this pad. Typically, if you wanted to, you could bring in just a standard shaker loop and then time stretch it. But what happens is when you start adjusting the tempo of your project, you're gonna start hearing artifacts. So within this pad, the shaker loop, also within the tambourine and the hi-hat loop, we're using a thing called sample cycling. So let's dive into the program edit for this drum kit and take a look at sample cycling. Quickest way to get there is if you hold menu, these 16 pads now line up with all the icons on the screen. So if we just hit the second one real quick, we're automatically going to jump into the program edit for the drums. You can see if we select shaker, now we're on the shaker. And when we're on the samples tab, you're going to see that there's 4 different layers of samples. Inside the MPC, you can layer up to 4 different samples per pad, and by default, they're all going to trigger at the same time. But if you come over here into master and then put it to cycle, that means that when I hit the pad, it's going to cycle through all 4 of the layers that are right here. So if we take a look at these layers, you can see that they all have the shaker loop loaded into them. How do you load a layer? Well, you just hit the layer and then hit the sample right here and click, and then you can select the corresponding sample that you want to load into it. So I've loaded the same shaker loop into every single layer here. And if we look at each one, we notice that the in and the out point, which you can move just by touching on the screen and dragging your finger, that is set to different sections of the loop. So on the very first layer, which is always going to trigger first, I have it at the most accented part of the shaker loop, but then on the second, the third, and the fourth, it jumps around to different parts of the loop allowing me to select different sections. So if I wanted, let's see, a little bit more variety, I could come over here and select this and drag this out. Now, while I'm playing this pad, it's going to jump through all all four of these different layers. And that can be seen if we come over here in a sample edit. You can see that it's jumping around to those different sections. The benefit of this is that when I get into changing my tempo of this song, instead of starting to hear the artifacts of the time stretching of that loop, I actually just hear the loop with its natural grain and as it was, but the tempo can be changed pretty drastically. So let's go all the way down to 89. It still has the same tonal character. I'm not hearing any characteristics of time stretching. I can speed it way up to, let's say, 131. And it's maintaining and preserving the tonal characteristics. So that is a method called sample cycling. I use it majority of the time when I want to maintain more of an organic feel. That can also be found right here in the hi-hat loop and also on the tambourine loops up there. So let's take a look at those real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute those. Now this is the accented hi-hat, that's all it is. But this actually cycles through 4 different layers of different sections of the loop. So again, menu, program edit right here. We'll go into this one. Again, we see the hi-hat is layered on 4 different layers and it's just jumping around. Now the difference on this hi-hat loop to keep it more organic is if I go into master, you can see that it's selected as random. So it won't do a predictable cycle through all 4 of these different layers. It's going to randomly select one of the 4 layers. So the hi-hat loop maintains a very, very organic feel to it. So, and again, with this, if I come in and turn this down, we don't hear any artifacts going on within this time stretching because essentially we're not relying on the algorithm to time stretch it. We're just slowing down the cycling of those sampled layers inside of here. So same when we go up to the tambourine up here. If we really quickly jump back into the program edit, we'll notice that this one is cycling through 4 different layers, while this one is just maintaining and hitting the 1 layer on the most accented part. So that sounds. And also on this one, it's set to random. So this is going to vary which layer it plays, giving it much more of an organic feel because it's not just repeating the same vibe. And again, we can come in and turn this way down. We don't hear any artifacts from that. So that's a little trick called sample cycling you can use to kind of preserve the tonal characteristic of a loop as opposed to just having the algorithm time stretch it forward and backwards. So now let's take a look at how we actually sequenced out this program. Let's start off with the kick. Now the kick is just a standard 4 on the floor. And then we brought in some claps and snares on the 2 and the 4. Now, if you're not familiar with sequencing, I like to use the step sequencer a lot inside of the MPC, and let's take a look at how that works. So you could either play it in live, or we're gonna go ahead and clear out these 3 sounds here just by hitting shift and then cut, come in here, shift, cut, come to this. It selects everything when you hit the pad, shift and cut. Now we essentially don't have anything playing through. So if we go into the step sequencer right here, it's actually really fast to sequence if you know roughly the sequence you're gonna do. Pad select, hit the kick drum right here, and we're just gonna drop these in, go to the next bar, drop these in, next bar, drop these in, next bar. Now we're on the 4th bar, and we can just go backwards. So we're gonna go pad select, kick and snare, that's on the 2 and the 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. So on the 2 and the 4. And then we can just go backwards and do that same sequence. Right? And now let's just go back into pad select, select this guy, and then do the exact same thing, but moving forward. So really quickly, that took a couple of seconds, and we have our sequence going on here. Now we're gonna bring in the hi-hats right here that kind of have that groove, and also 2 open hi-hats. You'll notice that this hi-hat is just coming along with the snare on the downbeat, And then this hi-hat is gonna come through and add that groove rhythm to it. This hi-hat is an open hi-hat that's layered on the snares and the claps just for a little bit of extra variety. It's pretty subtle, but you hear it when it's not in the mix as opposed to hearing it when it's in the mix. So now we're gonna add the open hi-hat, which comes at the end of the measure. It's gonna come right over here. A little 80s super reverb clap. Now this is just a standard clap that does have a little bit of added reverb on it, clap verb right here. And let's take a look at where this guy is coming in. So this guy's just coming at the end of the first 2 bars and at the end of the last 4th bar right here. And then just to keep it pushed and adding more groove, we're gonna come and unmute that shaker loop. And then also add in the tambourines here. And again, if we take a look at how these are sequenced out, they're just straight across on 16th notes, but since we're using that sample cycling technique, it doesn't sound robotic, it sounds more organic and gives it groove and variety. And then these perks right here are just coming in the upbeat randomly, just to add a little bit of variety and groove to the mix. And that pretty much sums up our drums. It's not too complex, but using those little tricks like the sample cycling inside of there is going to give this drum groove a little bit more rhythm. Now let's take a look at the bass line here. So for this bass line, I'm actually using F9 instrument expansion pack because they have some really good, authentic live basses in there. For this, we're using, I assume, what's a Fender Jazz Bass. It has a really nice sound to it. And what I want is something that doesn't really have too much complexity, but has more of a groove to it. So we're gonna hold shift and we're gonna go up to notes right here and set our notes. I know I want this in G minor. Minor is gonna give me more of a little edgy melodic feel to it. So I'm gonna stick within G minor and I'm going to after messing around for a little bit, doing a couple different variations, this is the bass line that we ended up with. And now that I have the bass line, it actually makes it really easy for me to expand off of that, adding the chords and other rhythm elements, because I already know the chords that I'm gonna be going in between. Based on what we laid down for the bass line, I'm gonna have a G minor, it's gonna go down to an E flat, and I'll probably hit a chord right up here in the B flat when it goes. I'll probably hit the B flat and then drop down to the E flat and then step up to the F. So I pretty much know that my chords are gonna follow that bass line to keep it consistent. But I don't want the chords to start off just out of nowhere right away. I want to add maybe a little texture to it before the full chorus comes in. So if we go to the second track, we're using, again, from F9 Instruments, the muted guitar. And if we take a look at how that's laid out, it's literally just note repeat on 16th notes, but without full velocity. So I can have some sensitivity of the pad, and then I just hit an octave up while we're going through with this note repeat right here. So now let's take a listen just to what this chugging guitar sounds like by itself. And then it goes up the octave. Now when you bring in that with the bass line, So then we have our drums, our bass line, and that consistent guitar that just adds a drive. That guitar is going to be really important when we start arranging this and bring it into the chorus. So next, after that, we added some chords in here. So let's go ahead, unmute these chords, and take a look at how we laid out these chords. Now, if we come over here to chords, right, and take a look at shift and go back into the notes mode, we simply just made these in chromatic chords because we remember that we have G1, and then the bass line goes up to B flat for a second, down to E, and steps up through F. So we have and it was in a higher octave. So these chords that will come in through the chorus are essentially just following the bass line the entire time. So let's bring those in with the bass line. We can hear them together. And that's pretty much the basis of all the melodic content. And now we're just going to start adding those textures and layers. We already have the guitar chug. But I want something else also to drive it. So using those same chords, but then adding the arp while those chords are active. And if you don't know how to do that, we're going to go into shift notes mode. While we're in notes mode, if we turn on note repeat and double click it to latch and then have a look at it in the main here, we can see that it is now going to cycle through the different notes of that chord. And if you want to change the arp patterns, you can come in here to the arp and change exactly the style of how that arp is played, whether it's up, up, down, down, up, everything of that sort. So if we come in and take a look, and switch over to our arp, we can see that we just held down the exact same pads and it just recorded the only difference with the arp, instead of stepping up here and here, we actually are just holding the two main chords, which is that G and that E flat. So if we come in and listen to that with the actual main chords, now, for these chords, we're actually using Hype. Now, Hype is one of the built-in plugins that comes inside of the MPC, and it has thousands of different presets. Now, for this one, you just picked Club 1 Pluck, and if we go into the program edit, we did a little bit of tweaking inside of the EQ right here. I'm gonna have a whole video series on sound design within the different instruments inside of the MPC because they're extremely powerful. However, for this, we picked a preset and tweaked it a little bit here, and we jump over into the ARP. If you're not aware, you can hold down main and then just click on any one of the tracks to jump right to it. Again, we're also using Hype inside of here to get the sound that we want. MPC plugins are extremely powerful. You can pretty much find any sound you need inside of them, and that's how we're getting this. So this essentially would be our main elements of the track. But just to add a little bit more texture, what we did is we added the lead. And another layer of chords higher up. The chords are an octave up. And these are used just to fill out that frequency spectrum. What did we use for each one of these? Well, for the lead, again, we used Hype right here. Hype, we just used the Future saw lead. We didn't do much as far as the sound design and changing it. If we go to effects 1, pull down the low frequency a little bit just to make it easier to mix. And then if we go into the next track here, again, hype, real power, which is a pad inside of there. And again, not much change within here. Maybe bring down the low just to make it a little bit easier to mix in there. But again, I urge you to check out hype and all the other instruments inside of the MPC because they are extremely powerful. In the future, we'll be doing a full video on the entire sound design process within each one of these because you can get any sound you want out of these plugs. So if we go in and add those guys in, this is what we have. You can hear these chords add a whole new layer of frequency onto that. And now for this one, guitar 2, that is another sort of lead. But what we did with this guy is it's an F9 guitar from the F9 expansion. And the one thing we did in here is we went in to the master and we changed it to mono because we wanted to activate legato in order to get this gliding slide of the guitar actually note bending in between the notes. So if you're not familiar, in MPC 2.10, you're able now to do those legato portamento bends in between the notes. And if we listen to it by itself, it's pretty simple. But those little bends add a lot when it's in here with the rest. The other upper chords, and then the only other track that we have going on here is this snap. It's a standard snap from a sample pack. And this was really put in there just to have something for the verses of this. So when you layer it in here, you can barely hear it, but when you use it only on the verses with the pads, it actually adds a very nice element. Some ideas of what we could do maybe for an intro or a verse is we could come in here with just, let's say, the snaps and the chugging guitar. Add the bass line. Add the arp. Then take out the bass in this for a pre-chorus. And then bring everything in, a little filter modulation. All right, that's gonna wrap up making this 80s style weekend vibe beat on the MPC Live 2. Now in the next 2 videos, somewhere up here, we're gonna go through mixing down all those sounds to get them to fit together nicely, and also taking this beat and arranging it into much more of a recognizable song structure. So thanks for your time, keep creating, keep inspiring, and also don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to get the drum sound so you can follow along with the other 2 videos, click the link below, head over to the Patreon page and show some love. Thank you so much, peace out.